It's beautiful how God orchestrates the whole service, and each time I have to speak on a subject, it feels like everything falls into pieces. And I love the fact that the worship time this morning was such a tender and peaceful experience. We felt in a kind of a different way how God is telling us, be still. I'm with you. I am your shepherd. And that ties in very well with my message today, because when I thought about this, of course, you know, we're going through the book of Thessalonians, the first of Thessalonians. We're in chapter 4, and we're going today to the verse 9 to 12. And the verse says like this, verse 9. Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. And yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, do so more and more, and make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, so that you will not be dependent on anybody. So really, when I thought about this section, I've titled my message to you this morning, A Quiet Life That Speaks the Loudest. So if you look at the chapter 4, at least in my Bible, there is this kind of a heading which says, a life pleasing to God. And last week's, we've been looking at how Paul is practically teaching how to live a pure life. So he comes with the message of saying you have to behave in a certain way if you want to be a good example to the people around you. Last week we saw that it's important to really grow in and have good boundaries in the way we relate sexually, because that's very important how, you know, about our morality and how people see us. But then I was thinking, oh, that message was quite tough. I'm glad I didn't have to preach it. But I was thinking, you know what? I feel that my section, it's equally countercultural, because minding your own business, it's not what people shout out at you today, do they? And God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Likewise, I'm thinking, our relationship with work is something that should be enjoyable, just like the first section of the message last week. Should be enjoyable, should be honest, should be measured, should be life-giving, and should be respectful to others. So then I'm going to look at 3 simple points, which are going to be work. First of all, I think, looking at the Bible, it's a gift from God. Work ethic after God's heart, and work as a clear part of ministry that wins the respect of others. So if I go in, the first, work is a gift from God. So the young church in Thessalonica is it's a fervent church. It's excited, it's young, but it feels like it was slightly imbalanced for some reason. Probably because, you know, Paul had to run away because of the stir-up that happened in the city, and he had to leave going to Corinth. Then he sends Timothy back because he really cared for them. And for some reason, these people started to feel like, oh, well, we understand that Jesus is returning. We grasp the message that you're preaching. Therefore, we shouldn't do much, because why work if God is coming next week? So they caught this kind of idea probably slightly wrong, and Paul has to address this. And Paul starts to speak about work. Okay, and I'm thinking, in that culture, especially physical work was something to be looked down upon. Because of their Jewish culture, we know that the Jewish people generally thought that work is something bad. It's like a curse. And also that comes from Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, when, you know, God created the world. He worked hard. But then the curse came because of the fall, and then suddenly work became difficult. But actually, if you look at the first chapter, work was a gift. And God says, creates Adam out of soil and says, you have to work and look after the garden that I gave you. And then he creates Eve and a helper for him. So it's a gift. It's not a curse. That would be my main point. And work means creation, means ability to contribute and bring value. So that's why I would say it's a gift and it's something unique to humans, because we don't do this like an instinct. Let's say like probably an animal would build a shelter or something. You do it very intentionally and brings value, and it's just something that reflects who God is by the fact that he trusts us as humans to work with him and give us this calling. In ancient Greek, if you read the philosophers, they generally think, you know what, manual labor is something that's beneath us. It's really just for slaves, and it's a cultural norm that allowed free men to pursue other greater things like large-scale commerce and arts. And Aristotle and Plato thought that the work was pretty much a waste of time. And say manual labor would be, and I quote this, brutalizing the mind until it was unfit for thinking the truth. And of course, you know, at that stage, Thessaloniki was part of a Roman occupation, even though it was a free city. But the Romans didn't have a much better view either. Though they were more industrious, they were still thinking about labor, manual work as something not to be sought really. And I got this quote which says that people should really try to probably at least, well, if you're not just thinking about things, you know, just philosophically looking at life, okay, at least aim to get an honorable, quote, honorable retirement into a rural peace as a country gentleman, but nothing more than that. And yet, when we look now at the biblical worldview, which changed that and elevated work because God is the one that worked first. And it completely changed the direction. And in the first chapter, Paul says, we give thanks to God always for all of you, constantly mentioning you in our prayers, remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus. Because why? Because you became an example to all the people in Macedonia. You know what kind of man we proved to be among you for your sake, and you became imitator of us. For you remember, brothers, our labor when we were with you, and our labor and toil, we worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. So really leading by example and really getting your hands, you know, dirty, I would say, and not be dependent on anyone. And Paul is making this strong point, and that's my first point. Work is a gift from God. And as soon as you see that, it doesn't matter what you actually do, being an accountant, being a lawyer, being a carpenter, whatever we do, there's value in that because it's a gift from God. And that is part of our ministry. And then my second point would be work ethic after God's heart. And here's the part that I really like about this, where Paul comes and says, make it your ambition. Ambition. And you think about ambition. Ambition sounds like something to be really celebrated, and we think about ambitious people and we love, and I consider myself an ambitious person. But when you think about that, you think of, you know, high achievers, people that lead movements. Maybe they build companies, or maybe they build organizations and so on. And yet Paul says, be ambitious to live a quiet life. And that is very contradictory, I would feel. I would not really expect to say be ambitious to be quiet. But quiet in this sense, it doesn't really mean lazy. Of course, it doesn't mean, actually it doesn't mean at all to be lazy. It doesn't mean to be unproductive. It just means don't run after the approval of people. That's not what an ambitious person should really be. And don't be busy bodies, just busy. And actually he has to address this in his second letter, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, 7-12. He says, just kind of re-emphasizing this point, he says, we were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with toil and labor we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. It was not because we do not have the right, but to give you in ourselves an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Ooh, that's harsh. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now such person we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. So again, it comes, mind your own business. So I thought I'm being called here to teach you how to build your own business. But actually I'm saying mind your own business. And to be honest, I have a great example in that. My grandfather, for me, was kind of, I don't know, I have this very high regard view of him. And I'll give you an illustration what happened. So obviously, I knew him when he was in his late 60s to up to his early 90s. And he was always very kind and always very mindful of his own business. Never really questioning and asking too many questions, other people. So I remember the day he died. Very clear, 93 years old, he was still reading every day, he was still doing all the stuff by himself, he didn't need anyone's attention really. He would come to my mom's table and he would say, the food was great, always have something nice to say. I'm going to go and look after myself, he goes to the toilet and so on. So that day, his routine was, he would go, because my parents lived like on a cul-de-sac, so it's at that end, and he would go and sit in my father's car. And just look on the window for about 2 hours. Not, minding his own business. And then he sits there, and on that day, 2 people sit in front of the car. He used to sit on the back. So one on the driver's seat, one on the passenger seat. And my grandfather, being such a sensitive, person, he doesn't ask a question. He looks outside, he comes back, he comes to dinner and says to my parents, by the way, who are those 2 people that were sitting in the car with me? And then my dad was like, whoa, what are you talking about? He obviously didn't say that, but he was like really alert. What's going on here? So he was seeing somebody, but minding his own business. He didn't even ask the question, what are you doing here? They had all the right to sit there with him. Obviously, then he went to the toilet. Then he went to his bed, and he died peacefully. And we know as Christians, that's often an example of how God prepares the way people go home. And he was sending 2 people to be there with him. But I love the fact that he didn't even ask, what are you doing here? It was such an amazing. So I really see that as an example, and I make it part of my life, not to put too many questions. And I've realized as a business owner, that's actually a very good thing. You don't put too much questions. You don't say too many things. And the Bible teaches us that it's excellent and we should really number the amount of words we say. And in the words there's life, but there's also death. And I was thinking, if I manage to look after my own tongue and be able to speak only when I have to, I'll go far. Because that's what the Bible says. Proverbs 10-19 says, when words are many, sin is unavoidable. But he who restrains his lips is wise. Proverbs 17, even a fool is considered wise if he keeps silent, and discerning when he holds his tongue. James 1:19, my beloved brothers, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen. So quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Those who consider themselves religious, James goes on, and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues, deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. I mean, Seriously, can word really nullify my ministry if I'm not really careful what I'm saying? Jesus says in Matthew 12, "But I tell you that a man will give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken." Ecclesiastes 5, "Do not be quick to speak, and do not be hasty in your heart to utter a word before God. After all, God is in heaven and you are on earth." And finally, because I have many verses on this, "There is profit in labor, but mere talk leads only to poverty." So it's obvious that the Bible has lots to say about the amount of words we speak and how we should carefully consider when we open our mouth. I know it might sound strange, but I think it's such a practical wisdom that we can all learn from it. And I love the fact that Forest Town Church really has zero tolerance to gossip. And that was one of the key things for my wife and I when we came here to really consider making this our home, when we understood that there is no tolerance for gossip. Because I come from a background where when I get home, my next door neighbor started to sweep the gate in front of there to listen what I'm talking about. And it was very common that you would say something and suddenly somebody comes closer and listens. And to see such a dramatic change when we came here and we saw that people are really careful when speaking about other people. And yes, we have issues and we're not perfect, and there might be even reason to talk about something, but you have to be careful. And I've learned that. So I'm preaching first to myself. I'm not trying to. It's interesting because even Paul says the same thing. About these things, I don't have to tell you because you're already doing it. And I'm saying this, you don't have to listen to me because you're already doing this. And it's funny how usually the people who are actually doing the thing get taught about that. I found something interesting also in my workplace. As I was saying, at one point I've realized, as I said, that if you speak too much, you can get yourself in trouble. So we started to speak with the guys, look, whenever a client comes, you speak only what you're asked. Because I had people who would come, and the client comes and does his beautiful room in a beautiful foreign bowl paint, and the carpenter comes and says, such an ugly paint color. I'm thinking, well, who asked you about your opinion on that? Because that's my decision as an architect, maybe. Or maybe it's a client's decision because it's their own house. And nobody asked you, why are you saying that? And I had situations and most of the times I had a situation when I didn't have to stop collaboration based on quality of work, but rather on nosiness. And I realized that an electrician would come in and put a socket here. And I said, why did you put it there? Because it's not on my plans, it's not on clients' opinion. And I said, well, I'm thinking that if I put it here, he might have a chest of drawers here. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Why you're not an interior designer? You're just being nosy at this point. So it's interesting. I was looking back that I didn't have to cancel relationship based on quality or on skills, but rather on things that are just not being careful what you talk or how you behave yourself in public. So zero tolerance to gossip, which is great, and I love it, and we should celebrate that, and we should really be observant to that. And looking at the biblical principles of godly work ethic, as I've really named my second point, is Jesus said, I'm going away, which is good. It's good news for you, actually. Even nobody said, well, how is that good news? It's good news because I'm going to send you my Holy Spirit, who's going to help you and guide you. And it's actually good news for you guys. And then we know that the fruit of the Spirit is, in Galatians 5, love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things, there is no law, which actually means there's no measure. I mean, you can do this as much as you want, because those are the fruit of the Spirit. And when I speak about work, I don't necessarily speak about profession. I'd rather speak about work as you wake up, you start working. You go downstairs or upstairs or whatever, and you start doing something, and maybe prepare the breakfast for your children, or maybe help your wife with something, or maybe, that's work already. And all those kind of things can be reflecting the way we lead life. That's work already. By the time we get to work, we've already worked a lot. So faithfulness, for example, Jesus is teaching us that if you are faithful in little things, so if you mind your business and you are very careful on the things that have been assigned to you, that's a sign that you can be entrusted with greater things. Diligence, Proverbs often, repeatedly praises diligence and warns against laziness. Integrity, Christians should work honestly, whether or not anyone is watching. Excellence, believers should seek to honor God through the quality of their work. And humility, we work not for applause, but for God's glory. And it's easy to be stirred up because there's so much injustice, and there's so many issues, and there's so many feeds that come on our phone with all sorts of things that really are not our business. They are interesting, and yes, they are, palpable things, problems in the world. But Jesus is rather responding to this kind of things in a way by saying, look after your own house first. Look at the things that really you can change. And don't really worry too much about other things. And I was reading something very interesting on this, where it says, don't be the person who always reads all the news feed. Let your friends be that. In a sense of, they will tell you the main stories anyway. But if you swim in this kind of infinity pools, like a feed, like let's say like an Instagram feed, well, it's never ending. And all the information seems kind of interesting. Yet, in order to really work or mind your own business, or just be very attentive to what you do, you have to really be very focused and selective with the information you digest and what you take in. And we see that in Jesus' practice, because at that time, there were many things that were pressing, and people were expecting that Jesus would be this kind of triumphant king who's going to overthrow the Roman rule. And on these things, he says, just live quietly. Many, many, many situations where they were expecting him to say something. He says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. He was not there to overthrow the kingdoms, and he is calling us not really to stir up and just, push on and march on. I'm not saying those are bad things in themselves, but that I don't think that is what the Christian life is called to. It's rather called to a quiet life. And finally, my third point would be work is an area of ministry that wins the respect of others. And I'm careful when I say this, because I know I've worked with many people. I've worked with people from this church. And I'm thinking, did I do a good job? Because if I'm saying now something interesting, but I haven't treated them fairly, I'm not sure if they're going to listen to me. And I've been invited to go on a site recently, 2 weeks ago. So I go on a site, and the client says to me, it's almost like a saving up plan for this project, because we've been let down by the previous contractor. So I run my own architecture and construction business, so we do all this kind of stuff. So I go there, and we look at the project, and it was a mess. It was a mess. Now, I could not understand who was paying for that. How did we get there? Because everything was bad, and it's been like over a year, probably even more, in that project. And I'm thinking, how is the architect made this possible? Because I'm not, at this point, I was not even blaming the contractor. I'm blaming who's been looking after this. And then I received the drawings. And when I look at the drawings, I see the name of the practice, which I know. And it's Christian-led. And I felt heartbroken. But before I point the finger, I was thinking, how did I behave when I worked with my clients? Because sometimes I was rushed, and maybe I didn't give the best service that I could have done. Or I made mistakes and stuff like that, So I'm thinking, if for me that was a shocking experience, because I could not understand how they came to that point with having all the right people on board, I'm thinking, okay, but let me first look into my own life. and understand that if I'm not doing if work is not part of my ministry, I'm never going to get this message across. And actually people will gonna turn away when I'm speaking. So really it's a very challenging thing to know that work is an area of ministry, and the reality is that we spend most of our time at work. So looking at the crew that Jesus had, we see all sorts of people. But Jesus himself was busy being a carpenter for most of his life. He actually only came in public life for the last 3 years. But up to that point, he was busy building. He was busy working with his hands, which was against, as I said before, against the grain of society, because the great people were expected to be white collar, not blue collar like me. And yet he says, I see Andrew and I see Peter, they're fishermen, you're worthy to come. If other people would have said, okay, let us assemble 12 people to go in Jesus' crew to save the world, they would probably go to the synagogue or to the university, the Jerusalem's university, to get the brightest. I'm not saying that's not bad. Academia is great and it's a gift from God. But yet he does this to show us that there's no such things in the kingdom. In the kingdom, whoever wants to work can work. And there's dignity in every work. And a carpenter for most of his life was what God said, that's good. That's what I want. A fisherman that toiled all night to try to catch some fish became a fisherman, a fisher of men. A tax collector, if you look at Matthew, what would that be today? I don't know. I don't want to put some bad... it's a tax collector, yeah? Let me not say the word. Again, something that Jesus looked upon and said, that's worthy. Can come along and do the ministry. A zealot, like Simon a zealot, that would what? A political activist, lover of Israel, and thinking, we have to do something because the Romans are we are pressing us and we have to do something. And Jesus really teaches that, no, that's not going to be the way you're going to change the world. Paul, a tent maker, working with his hands. You remember Dorcas? People were crying. Do you remember her lovely clothes? An excellent cloth maker. Acts 9 that says, all the widows stood around him, crying and showing him, that's to Peter, showing him the robes and other clothes that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. That was her ministry. Wonderful clothes. So leading a quiet life, what it really means and what it really shows, in my opinion, it shows dependency on God. It shows that it's not my skills that are going to get me there, but it's God's provision. It shows faith and trust. And by living a quiet life, Jesus modeled the way of true activism against the fallen system. And he restored the dignity of labor by working with his hands. He elevated the status of manual labor, the power of humility. He upended the ancient world's obsession with power and self-promotion by serving the poor. He said, I came to proclaim the good news to the poor, to the people who don't deserve it. He brings the inner peace and just stillness. The Lord is my shepherd. Constantly pressed by crowds and opposition, Jesus remained deeply serene, unhurried, and grounded. This non-anxious presence provided a blueprint for inner transformation rather than external rebellion. And revolutionary ethics, the life he led birthed a movement that ultimately dismantled systems. And it's interesting, so can you see the power of a quiet life? A quiet life under God's blessing and following his guidance is not a life that is wasted, because that can be the trap. And I feel, time Time is running by. I felt young. Now I don't feel that young anymore. And time is running, and I feel like I have to do something, and I have to scream and say something that I can leave a legacy behind. And I should probably get people to follow me because I want to say something. And yet, I look at the Bible and I look at Jesus, and it's not really about that. And it's not teaching me that I should be really loud and I should get lots of people to follow me because I will have good things to share. No, it says you just have to work carefully as an architect, as a builder, whatever, as whatever it is. And that's going to be your greatest ministry that you can bring to people. Yes, then I will do my best to do other things. But I feel that my biggest calling is actually to be faithful in my workplace. And that's a great challenge because it's not easy. And you know that. And a quiet life, as I said, is not wasted, but turns the world upside down. And I like when we look at the letter that Paul sends to the Thessalonians. Actually, if you look at Acts 17, it shows like from an outside angle what happened. And when Paul was in Thessalonica, actually a mob started because they were furious of what happened, because he was preaching such a revolutionary message, they thought. And the kind of accusation they brought in Acts 17, verse 6 and 7, is the mob says, this man, speaking about Paul, this man who have turned the world upside down have come here in Thessalonica, and Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar. Really? I mean, he's teaching that you should really lead a quiet life. Mind your own business. So a quiet life can really turn the world upside down. Yes, it can. It can, because that's what people see, and then you can speak. So some quick practical points to take away. Live like Jesus. I mean, it's very simple, hard to do. Start the day in solitude, if you can, or maybe find a time, if it's not morning, at some point, to really put the volume down, the notifications away, and start to focus on one topic that's in front of you. That's why I like reading books, physical books that have a start and an end, that I know I've done it, I've read it, it's not going to come something else. Prioritizing rest often, and we see Jesus often, he removed himself from the crowd. He says, I have to go away, and I have to pray, and I have to be by myself, and I have to speak with the Father. And in a world that's so busy and so rushed, it feels incredibly busy, incredibly difficult to actually find that time. And yet that's how a quiet life can become a powerful life. Don't get stirred up in controversy and conspiracy. I say this very tenderly, I would like to. I come from a background, again, where people are very into conspiracy. And I kind of understand, because there's lots of bad things happening. And yet Jesus does not get into that. If you look into the Bible, it does never get into that. And I would say, stop scrolling. That would be a great advice to live. Stop scrolling if you can. Do it. Yeah, just stop it, as Helen said last week. Just stop it. And now, as I'm closing, my really advice, completing this message, would be, go by His grace and live a quiet life that really speaks the loudest. May God bless you in that and give you wisdom how to do it, and give me wisdom how to do it. Amen. And now, I said be quiet, but then we're going to enjoy some time together. You don't have to be quiet then. Bless you guys.